Hello friends, welcome to this lecture. So in this lecture we will understand how to reduce the size of your data set that you have imported. So sometimes what happens is that you import a data set and which is a very large data set like into GBs, 2 GB or 3 GB or something like that and and when you work on this particular data set it takes time to generate the output and it sometimes it becomes very frustrating also, and sometimes it happens that your computer crashes or your notebook crashes, so all those kind of problems happens. So it becomes very important to check your data set size before once you import it, and reduce the size uh, whenever or whenever possible. So in this lecture, we will understand how to check the size of the data and how to reduce it for to a manageable size so that we can work it without any loss of data. So for this tutorial, I have imported, you can see imported the from sys I have imported the get size of, which basically checks the size of the data. And as usual, I have imported pandas and the numpy here. So I'll just import it here. So dataset I have downloaded from this particular web page. So this particular web page has, if you open it, so this particular web page have mm, the taxi data of New York City for each month. So you can download any one of the yellow taxi records. So this will be a very large data set. So so I have already imported it. So I'll import it this data. So it is taking time since it is a large data set. So let's wait. So now it's imported. Now we'll check the size of the data set. So for checking the size, I'm just doing get size of and in bracket df, and I'm dividing it by 1024 times 3 because I want to get the size of the data set in GBs. So you can see the data set is about 2.36 GBs. Now check the what are the various data types in it. So we can see here there is a um, there's a integer, then there are objects also, there are float 64, etc., etc. So now the first thing that you can do here is that what happens is that int 64 is the default data type when you import a, a integer into pandas data frame. But this is a very large data set type, and it takes a lot of space. You don't need it basically for for doing your analysis. Most of the times our integer values are not large. Those integer values are very small. So it is good to convert it into a smaller um, data type uh, like uint8, which stands for unassigned int8 form. So I can see that there are some data set type like pickup location, drop location, passenger count, payment type, vendor ID, etc. They are imported as an int format. So I will just change it into the other format like uint8, and then we'll check the size of the data. So I have changed it, and then I will check the size of the data. So now you can see that has now come down to 2.11 GB. Earlier it was 2.36 GB. Now it has come down to 2.11 GB. Other thing what we can do here is that if some of your variables are imported as an object, and if you can convert them to some other Python objects, then it would be great. So for example, here I can see that my pickup date time and my drop of date time variable are basically coming as an object. If you can see here, they are coming as an object. So I will convert it into date time format, because storing your data in an object form takes a lot of space, and which increases your size of the data. So I will just convert it into a date time. If you can see here, I am just mentioning the variable and converting it into a date time. Now we will check the size of the data. If you can see, the size of the data is again come down to almost uh, to 1.14 GB. Now, other thing is that if you have some variables which are categorical in nature, so for example, you have some binary variables, or you have variable called male and female, which which do not have too many values, then you basically change it to the categorical. You can change it, their type, you can change it to category, because storing, as I told you before, storing your variables in the string format or object format takes a lot of time. So for example, in this case, the store and forward flag in the dataset, it has only around two values, so I will be changing it into a categorical. Now if I check the size of the dataset, it has come down further to around 1.09 GB. Now again, so for example, for example, some data set like um, data set like fair amount, tip amount, total amount, toll amount, extra, and extra or improvement surcharges. These are basically into dollars, and these are basically come as in a float. So if you can see here, the tip amount is float and all that. So these are into float, and these are basically dollar amount. So what you can do here in this case is you basically convert it into a cent by multiplying it into 100, and then again converting it into the undefined int 8 thing, so that it remains, so the float part goes out and it remains as an integer format. Okay. So now we'll check the form. So you can see it has come into the 0.79 GBs. So other thing is that for example, this trip distance. So trip distance is basically, it's a float, because the values is basically coming as in 1.5 kilometer or 2.5 kilometer. So it's a float. So we cannot convert it into basically integer type. But what you can again do it here, you can, maybe if it is in miles, you can convert it into maybe some of the lower units, maybe meters and all that. But here what I have done is, here I have um, so it is into the float 64. So float 64 is basically again like int 64. The float 64 is for very large large values. So for example, it will be so it can accommodate for example, values like 0.00786979, and something like very large points value it can accommodate, but you don't need it here you need a very small value. So you can, instead of using float 64, you can convert it into a float 16. So now I will convert it into a float 16, which is again decimal values, but dimensions will be very less here. So now I'll check the size of the data. So again, the size of the data set has now come down to 0.74 GB from 0.79 GB. So again, there's a reduction in it. So so now you can see that, like how we have reduced the size of the data from 2.36 GB to sorry, it is a 0.74 GB, 0.74 GB, and it will be a reduction of around 60 to 70%. So you can see, like how we have reduced the type dataset size just by looking at the variable type, and then just changing the type to either from int64 to unassigned int 8, or from float 64 to float 16, or from you know, converting an object form to basically categorical, or from object to object to this categorical form. So by doing this, you can basically reduce your data set, and which will in the end, you know, make your data set smaller, and you can work on your data set without losing any information, and your querying will be faster if you do these kind of initial manipulation in your data set. So thank you. Let's meet again in the next video.